I've never really read a lit fic book that I like absolutely adored. They're always just kind of like, Hi, my name is Allie. Welcome to my channel where we chat about all things bookish. Today I'm doing the Booktube Newbie Tag challenge. This is a challenge that consists of about 10 or 11 questions that you can find on like Reddit and just on Google itself. Just 10 questions to kind of get to know me as a reader and get to know kind of what I'm going to be doing as I grow my channel. First question is, why did you start this channel? I started this booktube channel at the beginning of December 2024 when the TikTok ban really started to seem very real and very finalized. As I'm recording this, I still don't really know what's going to be happening with TikTok, but I think that it's just best for me to start exploring new avenues to continuously chat and yap about books that aren't just TikTok. So here we are. What are some fun and unique things you can bring to BookTube? I think in terms of like uniqueness to BookTube, I talk a lot about indie authors, about indie books, about BIPOC books, about queer books, about disability representation in books, and I do it all through a lens of like fantasy. Fantasy, we'll get to that, but fantasy is really like my genre and the love of my life, and finding all those different types of representation and chatting about those representations in the context of the fantasy world is, I think, part of that makes my channel a little bit more unique. Overall, I'm not sure exactly what this channel is going to entail in terms of like what type of content. I'm still trying to figure that out and playing around with some things, but you can definitely expect fantasy recommendations with those different voices and different representation. The next question is, what are you most excited for about this new channel? Honestly, I'm just excited to have another avenue to talk about my favorite books. Whether or not TikTok goes away, I really do think that sitting down and having a little bit of long form content never hurt anybody, and I'm really excited to start exploring this and kind of thinking about what I can do with a YouTube channel and thinking about all the books that I can chat about. Why do you love reading? That's a big question. I've been reading since forever. I read as a kid, I read growing up. I got a little bit out of reading as I got older and entered high school and my college degrees. There just wasn't as much time for reading for fun, as I'm sure we all can kind of relate to. And so I've just spent so much of my life reading, and I just love, especially with fantasy, visiting the different worlds, hearing different stories about different people and different things. It's just so much fun. Number 5 is, what book or series got you into reading? Again, I've been reading for forever. I've been reading since I was a young kid, so I don't really exactly know like what book got me into reading when I was young. I know that I love to collect books. I know I love to read them. I remember a lot of like the Nancy Drew books that I would get from the library. I also have a couple books from my childhood. Specifically when I was young, I really loved these books. The Miss Mantle Chronicles, which I've literally never seen anyone talk about on TikTok. I need to look it up on BookTube, but this is like a fantasy series, and it absolutely made me fall in love with kind of like this like kind of old man fantasy and this lovely world building. I loved the Narnia movies and the books. I obviously was a Warriors fan, even though I haven't like kept up with them. I teach younger kids and they tell me all the time about like how this has like morphed into like 5 different series and there's so many books. But I was a Warriors kid. I also feel like my parents did a really good job of putting books in my hands that involve different voices. So like Esperanza Rising was a fantastic book that really, I think, made me value other people's stories and other people's lives. And then of course we have like the fantasy books of like Michael Scott's The Alchemist was really fun. I also really liked Percy Jackson growing up. So those kind of books really kept me, I think, reading when I was younger. In terms of getting back into reading after I stopped for a while, after I entered college and did my master's degree, the book that got me back into this reading sphere and back into the bookish community was really Babel by R.F. Kuang. In November of 2023, I kind of wanted to get back into reading, and I picked up a couple books. I don't remember exactly, none of them like have really stood out to me. And then I got more into book talk and consuming bookish content, and then I picked up Babel, and It was amazing. I think it literally took me like a month and a half to read Babel because I wasn't quite fully back into like my reading sphere yet. But I absolutely love Babel by R.F. Kuang, and I really want to read R.F. Kuang's backlog. But this book really just got me back into reading and reminded me why I love to read about other people's stories, even if they're fictional stories, but why I love other people's perspectives on the world, or why I love diving into new worlds. So this one really just brought me back, and I hope I never leave again. Number 6, what questions would you ask your favorite booktubers? I think in terms of booktube, I'm a little bit newer. I'm starting to get into consuming more booktube content as opposed to like book talk or bookstagram content. So I guess my questions for any like booktubers that I would have would be along the lines of like, what kind of content do you love making? What kind of books do you like talking about? What have you learned from being on Booktube, and specifically like this platform compared to other platforms? Always interested to learn about new spaces and new people and like new ideas. So those are the questions I would have. Number 7, what challenges do you think starting a Booktube will be the hardest to overcome? I think the hardest challenge for me right now is going to be like consistency. I think I decided for the first at least like 6 months of 2025 that I'm not going to stick to a schedule, and I'm not going to like worry about any time to sit down and film. I'm just gonna film, and I'm gonna edit, and I'm gonna upload whenever I want to and whenever I get the chance. And I really want to do that just to see what is sustainable for my life and what feels right and what feels good. I don't want to like burn myself out by setting a very strict schedule or an upload schedule, and like I don't know, I just don't want to creatively burn myself out. And I think that giving myself like 6 months to kind of figure out what I want to do is a really good time frame. So I think the biggest challenge will be consistency, and also just figuring out what I want to do in terms of these long form contents, right? Sitting down and filming a long form content, getting it onto my computer and editing it, I don't have any problems with that. I know how to do that. It just takes longer than like a YouTube Shorts. Oh, speaking of, I also want to do YouTube Shorts. So I think another challenge is going to be making videos that are shorter than a minute. Like a lot of my TikTok videos are more than a minute, and a lot of my reels are more than a minute, and so there's not a lot that I could transfer over here. So figuring out YouTube Shorts and then sticking or finding a schedule of what feels best to me, I think are going to be my 2 biggest challenges for Booktube. Number 8 is, when did you start reading? I've already touched on this in this video, but I've just been reading for forever. I read growing up as a kid and I absolutely loved it, but around like high school, I started having to fizzle out the amount of time I spent reading for fun because I just got busier. And then that continued into my undergraduate and my graduate degree. And then in November of 2023, I got back into the bookish community, into reading. I got a Kindle, like I got all that kind of stuff, and that's kind of kickstarted again, and I hope I never stop. Number 9 is, where do I read? I read a lot of different places. Sometimes I will read in this chair. This is in our kind of office and game room. A lot of times I will also read in bed or on the couch, but I typically tend to read at night. My husband and I are big gamers, so we'll be gaming at our setups, and then usually in the evening before I go to bed, I'll hop off games and I'll read a little bit before I fall asleep. So that's kind of what I like to do. Number 10 is, what kind of books do you like to read? I am a huge fantasy reader. I absolutely love fantasy books. I love stepping into another world. I love world building. It's like my favorite part of a book. I think that sometimes when I'm talking about like contemporary books or like more urban settings, it just doesn't feel like a separate thing. Like I love books to be a different world entirely. Of course, I like books that comment on our world and are set in our world, but it just doesn't hit the same as a really good fantasy book. So I mostly read fantasy books. I also typically try to listen to a nonfiction audiobook about once a month. I think last year I was able to hit 12 nonfiction books, and that was my goal. That's also my goal for 2025. I like to listen to those as audiobooks because they feel just like a really long podcast. And so I usually do fantasy with a hint of nonfiction is what I like to say. I also explore other genres. I just don't love them as much as I love fantasy. I've never really read a lit fic book that I like absolutely adored. They're always just kind of like, And then for like contemporary romance, I think it's just I haven't read a lot of them, and I'm going to definitely try to branch out into the contemporary romance genre this year because I have enjoyed some of the contemporary romances that I've read. And so I think that will be a good kind of goal to like branch out into that. But fantasy has my love. Fantasy just is really where it's at. In terms of fantasy, I really like any kind of subgenre of fantasy, but I really like to prioritize different voices. I consider myself a diverse reader. I like to pay attention to who writes my books and what they're about. So I really strive to platform any sort of BIPOC authors. I really also love and cherish and love to support indie authors, specifically self-published authors. So I talk a lot about and I read a lot of like indie books. I also like to read a lot of queer books, so you'll see a lot of queer books on my shelves or me platforming a lot of queer books. And then in terms of like what I want to read more of and keep my eye on are like disabled authors and disabled representation, specifically in fantasy books, because I feel like really authentic disability representation by disabled authors is a little harder to find in fantasy than it is in other like genres. So that's a little bit about me, what I like to read, and what you can expect from this YouTube channel. I really appreciate you being here. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you for another video. Thank you.